Thanks for joining me in this conversation. For this talk, as already explained in the invite, the object of inquiry is the role of knowledge within the infrastructure of artistic production, which I consider as an organization between artists, theory, curating, and institutional platforms as form of production. This follows a bit Peter Osborne's analysis. Particularly interested in the question of how communication occurs between these positions, and especially how knowledge now plays a role with the increase of the aspect of knowledge in the institutional context of art production. This is a logic to response to what is called network or cognitive capitalism. So knowledge also becomes imbricated as authorial position. That's the claim that I'm making. This complex configuration also necessitates to look at how it relates to the political economy of production. So the existing critiques on cultural production must therefore be extended to the realm of knowledge production as well within artistic production. This is why I'm especially glad to talk to you. You are a philosopher especially concerned with the interlink between philosophy, theory, and art. And I would say your main interests start with language and ontology, roughly speaking, but how this connects to aesthetics, arts, and the politics of arts. As one of the proponents of accelerationism, you advocate a more direct and instrumental role for art, which is set against the notion of indeterminacy, the principled openness of art that characterizes art production, but which also undercuts its political power, maybe. You not only write about these issues as essays or critiques, which output would be confined to the academic realm, but experiment with different forms of productional artistic platforms in which art and theory connect to the broader field of the arts, the economy, and societal design. Name can be discrete, curated production platform connected to the Berlin Biennale number 9, the film Hyperstition, and the numerous other workshops that you've been engaged with. So my main interest what I would like to discuss is this new role of philosophy in relationship to art production, of which you might be one of the proponents to reconsider this relation.
I mean, it's not just topics; it's practices, you know. And for me, working on issues always implies thinking about the institutional framework within which I am working. So for me, I'm also not an accelerationist. I'm interested in accelerationism as a certain phenomenon, having a certain potential. I'm interested in a speculative temporality that is at its core. I'm interested in questions of temporality. Of time. I've published like a lot on questions of not the philosophy of time, but what I call the tense philosophy, namely that philosophy far too often ignores grammar, linguistics. So thinking about time, we need to think about the grammar, the linguistics of time, the tense system, and so on. And the fact that it's not done is for me always has institutional reasons. So what kind of trends are there in philosophy? What schools are in fashion? Which one aren't? Which ones are trendy in the art world? Which one are trendy within academia, and so on? So for me, these things go together. Even if I write such a book on such an abstract topic like present tense novels. Even then, questions of the institutional horizon is present.
You mentioned that there's no interest for writing about time. Is that what you just said?
No interest. I mean, I couldn't make my living by writing texts about like specific linguistic and topics that are highly important, like philosophically, but they are just like so abstract that they do not work within the attention economy of the art world, let's say.
Oh, yeah.
So that is why without like seeing it as a negative compromise or as a selling out, I try to always translate certain ideas, for example, about if I just take the example of literature, thinking from literature, from the point of view of literature about time, you think not just about the ontology of time, what time is, but the direction of time. Mm-hmm. So questions like these I try to translate into a language and into phenomena that are more understandable for, let's say, post-internet generation of young artists. And then, of course, you don't talk about present tense novels, but you talk about phenomena of preemption. The core temporal phenomena, the speculative temporality, namely time not running smoothly, linear and chronologically, but maybe the other way around, or that we are governed more and more from the future. That is something that I can both analyze linguistically, but also more as a cultural analyst or so. And as I said, given the world we live in, and that we all have to pay the rent and fill our fridge, I communicate different to different audiences.
So there's no specific directed or invested interest in situating this knowledge within the artistic realm.
I mean, artistic. I'm not that interested in art in the first place. I've never. I mean, never is maybe too strong a word, but like I hope I've never written about art, or I try not to write about art. I hardly ever write about art and or artists or artworks. I'm interested in the field of art. That's a very productive field, and it enables a lot of like very progressive, productive things. Art itself, I'm not too. I don't have too many positive things to say, but I'm also, not maybe lacking the curiosity. But I work a lot in the art field, and that's both on the institutional level, but also on teaching and so on. And that's and that I can do this without like pretending that I'm an expert on the early Matisse or the late Duchamp or the middle Matthew Barney.
At the same time, observing from within the artistic realm, your ideas or your topic of research of interest, and which lands in many cultural forms, resonates highly within the artistic community, I would say. So that's
but you have to ask yourself, like, how does it resonate? Is it that anyone paints bluer images or makes like faster videos because I published something on accelerationism? No, I don't think so. So the impact is not on an aesthetic level, but it is. I mean, that is part also of my philosophy. I'm very critical, or I'm very polemic with regards to aesthetics. I'm interested in poetics, in the production of things, and that also means like understanding like what is my role within this institutional configuration that we call contemporary art. And I hope that I have a bit of a positive or progressive impact. And I didn't want to deny that. I want to say that it is not by saying something about artworks or having an impact on how artworks look like. I hope I have an impact on how people think. And here we come to a change that is maybe occurring or not from one day to the other, but like there's a slide or there's a slow transformation, that philosophy or theory, let's say, the role it plays within the art field is changing. So it's not, there's less and less the function of being critical about individual artworks and so on, but rather it interferes with the artist herself, and the way artists think and situate themselves in the world. That's where I'm interested. And I feel that the interest people have in me, young artists have in me, is also not me being an expert on Deleuze's film book, rather on questions of geopolitics, maybe, and so on.
So yes, I fully understand, and I agree. But it is obvious that the role of theory or of theoretical knowledge has become much more substantial. Maybe not just merely in people being interested in theory as such, but also in the role that art production as such is taken up much more of its coherence between what it might mean and what poetics means, in a much more organizational sense. I would say the people are much more interested in what it might mean or what effect it might resort, which requires some sort of locating it in how it functions, or as a societal phenomenon, or as an organizational activity. Maybe we could then go into one of your projects that you've then done to maybe find out how you operationalize your thinking within an artistic setting. Maybe the Berlin Biennale #9, in which you organized the project Discrete, might be a good case to examine or to discuss.
Yeah, but Discrete was, I mean, there's several things I did for the Berlin Biennial, but let's go back to take into account what I said before. What's usually, I mean, I don't know how many thousands biennials there are currently happening, even during Corona. And what is the role of theory usually, and for me, the question is how can I, what's positive and what's progressive about it, and what is just like tedious and actually boring. And like one typical thing to do in a Berlin Biennial with cool artists, let's say, whoever was part of it, like from Hito Steyr to anyhow, one role is that you engage with the artist, on topics that are important for society, let's say surveillance, right? And then you make a panel with Hito Steyr and you talk about surveillance. Many people come. I'm sure it's interesting because it's the other option is you organize a book on the biennial and you show like how political the biennial is, because they work on topics as surveillance and so on. So this is usually the role of theory, and I think it's very limited, and it's also not very inventive. It's very unpoetic. It's not very productive.
Yeah.
So I thought if I work with this specific generation and these specific curators from this magazine in Berlin and all the tensions that were around them, I gotta do something that is in itself artistic, namely trying to work site specific. And commenting and trying to transform the institutional framework I work in. I don't want to change. I mean, I don't have the capacities to change the institution of the biennial, but I can push a bit the boundaries of my role and the role of philosophy or theory. So I did several things. I did a more classical thing that is a book on time complex. I briefly mentioned it before, topics that I was working on for a long time, on a very abstract linguistic level, and try to translate them into for a different generation. But not just translate them as if they wouldn't change, but like also learn a lot by dealing with new technologies and having to nuance the argumentation. And then I organized a Discrete, which was a kind of 3-week performative theory installation, because biennials are very long, and I'm interested in the attention economy that produces. So I wanted to do something where theory actually behaves different and doesn't just do a kind of 1-day workshop or 2 days conference, no matter whether the biennial is 3 days long or 3 years long. So I needed to do something that is extensive to also reflect upon the temporal specificities of a biennial. And then it was also the locations they were choosing. So the one building was at Pariser Platz at the Brandenburger Tor in Berlin. And that was literally, that's literally the more or less the main building, the same building like the American Embassy, the English Embassy, that are hubs for spying into German politicians' phone, including Angela Merkel and so on. So and at the time, topics of surveillance were highly discussed. So I thought, okay, what we need is a kind of alternative, democratic intelligence agency. We need intelligence agency. They are the only ones who can support us in the fight about the main resource of the 21st century, namely data. But we need a democratic one, and this needs to be founded, and it needs to be founded in transparent fashion. In the front of the eyes of everyone, and that became that. And the third thing I did was an international young curators workshop for a week or so, and out of this also other things happened. I met a young, at the time I think 21 or 22-year-old Iranian curator, and with him I edited a year later or so a book on ethnofuturisms. So I always try to learn from young people. From younger people, and the authors of the book Ethnofuturism are like 80% musicians, artists, like Munir Al-Qadiri and Code 9, and not philosophers. So that I mean, this is not revolutionary, but you see a bit of transformation, working in the art field and really getting being open. In a philosophical way, like taking seriously the thinking processes that are there, and not pretending that, well, I have the philosophical thoughts and I translate them for them, and then these poor artists, they can do something with it, but rather in a recursive fashion, being open and integrating the other into one's own machinery and the other way around. So this is a bit how I work, and it actually they were quite successful projects. Even though at the beginning people thought I'm crazy because they wanted me to do a little kind of theory workshop, and I came up with a proposal for 3 weeks, occupying I don't know how many square meters. But it made sense, and I hope it somehow answers your question.
Well, I fully agree I can understand that it's a response against the conventional relationships in artistic production between theory and the arts, in which the theorist mostly indeed is this reflective or commenting or concluding voice that interprets what is produced, or as a side interpretation in the whole of production, which either validates such production or critically comments upon it, against which you propose a much more engaged form of interaction between philosophy and art production. In that sense, I think it's a significant new relationship that tries to immediately incorporate theoretical knowledge within production at a moment or at a time. maybe we can do this with what you've proposed as a poeticizing philosophy. You already mentioned the force of poetry to be very important. How does poetry and philosophy relate in your
I
opinion?
mean, it's not necessary. I mean, for me, poetry is important, but it's not so much poetry in itself.
No, I understand.
It's more poiesis
Yeah.
as as an operator, as opposed to what me and others like analyze as a kind of aestheticization of philosophy. I mean, the way philosophy has been reinvented, it's a certain strand, but a very for contemporary continental philosophy, a very important and dominant strand of philosophy has been reinvented around 1800 along the lines of aesthetics and the role of aesthesis, perception, and in the following also the role of art. And I mean, I can't go into details now about this, but I see many problems there. On the level of philosophy of consciousness, on the level of I already mentioned philosophy of time, that philosophers cannot help but thinking of time as something that already exists, as a phenomenon that we have a perception of time. Whereas, you know, from a kind of poetical philosophy point of view, time is constructed via a very nuanced temporal tense system that constructs like the perception of chronology that we have and so on. So on many levels, and that includes also institutional levels, I'm very polemical, or I'm trying to oppose against the what I call the aestheticization of philosophy, philosophizing under the aegis, or how do you say, under the hegemony of aesthetics.
Yes, that was one of the lines that caught my attention in your publication Metanoia, in which you insist on the quality of language versus that of aesthetics per se, as language as absolutely necessary in our sense of being, our ontology maybe even, but how you bring that in the discussion in how art is institutionally produced as this thing that is merely aesthetics, to be experienced in the moment, against which you propose fundamentally, I would say, in insisting on this role of language.
I mean, there's a whole chapter on it in my book Override, which is, by the way, on the poeticization of philosophy against the aestheticization, which is in itself a book against, or a book that also treats the invention of the modern academia, including art institutions and art academies and so on, and how these institutional, these aesthetic, and these artistic questions relate to each other. So this is the one philological remark I want to say out of narcissism. And the other one is the Metanoia book is not something I wrote, but I wrote together with Anke Henning.
Yeah.
I wrote books. And that is something that is also very important for me, that for me, writing, you know, is a poetic act, and writing and working with other people is in collaborating. Always takes on this very, sometimes very demanding and stressful and overwhelming dimension. But it's central to the way I work. I want to enter something, a project, and come back transformed. And it means also I'm pretty hard to work with for others. But that is, you know, like the question of transformation, and not of real transformation, and not just perception, perceptive or aesthetic transformation, is central to me. So I always work on the formats and the settings within which I work, and I measure the success of transformation, not just by the output that is on paper, but what happens between me and other people I work with, or the institution I work with, including the conflicts it produces. Conflicts are often an indicator that something is working, is actually communicating. Yeah.
Hard quality to measure, though, maybe.
Sorry?
A hard quality to measure, maybe, for institutional purposes.
I mean, hard, you know, I mean, but maybe two things about communication. One is I mean, the worst communication is the one where two people somehow understand each other and add to each other's like comments, and nobody learns something. And that is 99% of how we communicate. The ones where there's proper disagreement are interesting, you know, or where you realize that something is not working as smoothly. And there's another version of it that is where you actually realize that there's a gap, there is a kind of fundamental incapacity of communicating, and that is also something I always strive for, to encounter that. And Roberto Esposito wrote a lot about munus, you know, the kernel that is in unity and in community and in communication and so on. And munus actually etymologically means a lack. It does not mean what we share, you know. So what is a communication that is actually encountering this basic frustration? I don't want to sound like too Beckettian and too Adornian or too ethical here, but I'm very much interested in working processes and collaborations and communications that actually do not work smoothly.
I think this is also something which is something that is not really that much or does not find that many institutional new formats to organize this.
No, because it has an anti-institutional kind of like element, no? Yeah. And it also gets translated into psychologized or so into, well, he's difficult or so. And one also has to understand that the institutions need to work, you know. You cannot like reinvent them and say like, no, I'm not coming every Tuesday for the seminar because I think it's unproductive. I mean, it's tricky, you know. I mean, you have to. But we all know that doing conferences and coming every Tuesday for this and that topic is not the most productive way of working. So I try my best to, whenever I have the possibility and the luxury and the power, actually to not play along the rules, but always to the benefit of the institution. I mean, the Berlin Biennial is one example. I did many things I didn't want to, but like it was good, you know. But at no point did I plan things on purpose against them or so. I was always convinced that I'm right, and it's. But there were also no conflicts with them. It's just like straining the kind of capacities of institutions, you know. Yeah.
This rubbing off is immediately also part of the work. Then is this also a gap, your productional modus against that of the institutional mechanism? This rubbing off of your productional mode, the way you work against that of the institute.
It's not against. It's really
maybe set against or rubs against. I don't know.
I'm just trying to take institutions seriously and what their promise is, you know, and what they really want to achieve, you know, and what they could achieve. And that's so much more than I mean, we could all achieve so much more than we actually do. So, you know, I'm always into strengthening the superego, demand more. Don't think that politics is something you write about or think about or do art about. Just work, the politics is the conflicts you are capable of producing and steering in a productive, progressive way in your surrounding. That's it. It's a very old institutional critique insight before institutional critique became institutionalized.
This is more maybe that also is not part of your considerations, but I would be interested in the issue of categories between curating, theory, artist. The way I see it, as you call it, poeticizing philosophy. Can you call yourself then within this constellation that we have now, in which knowledge and meaning has become very important in cultural production? Could you consider yourself then also an artist, or is that a proposition you discard?
I mean,
for me, it has something to do with a politics of naming or a politics of position.
I mean, I did so in the past on this and that occasion for this and that strategic effect. And it's not wrong, because from what I told you already today, I've been artist at Berlin Biennial, which is a pretty prestigious, institution. So, sometimes when I teach like artists, I tell them, listen, I'm not the other, I'm not the theory and you are the practice. Actually, this doesn't work. You do a lot of theory without knowing it, and I do a lot of practice. My writing is a practice. I mean, so I practice with them writing and experiment with it, but also I did this and that. So in terms of who is who of art, I'm more an artist than you are because you're still studying. Of course, that's nonsense at the same time, but you see the point. Mm-hmm. So, again, for strategic reasons, it might make sense to push that. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't consider myself an artist.
No. Well, one of my critique that I've been looking into is this notion of relegation of accountability in the cycle of production between artists, curating institutes, and theory. Which runs against this notion of transformation that you just mentioned. I think it's very important to have transformation and poetics occurring in production as well. But you can find that the artist position can be attributed with special characteristics or is designated with certain functions to be performed within the chain of production. This exceptional position, which also occurs, of course, for theory, which also gets attributed with some sort of characteristics to be presumed within how it functions within this chain, and that's why I consider this a politics also to look into the positions. Well,
I mean, absolutely. Within the poetical kind of framework, you never have a kind of just dyadic kind of framework or basic situation of reflection, one on the other, but you have at least three, there's three elements. And it helps if you think about transformation. For me as a philosopher, like, how do I transform? How does the material I work on about transform? And what happens within the institutional configuration I work in?
Yeah.
And just to take the examples that I mentioned, what happens if me as a literary theorist or as a philosopher write a book on this topic saying that you weren't able to work on this and that because your discipline is shaped in this and that way, systematically neglecting linguistics, systematically doing this and that, and therefore you could not see this and that. So what happens with me in the field, or if I work at a biennial and I say like, listen, I'm not going to do a conference, what I can do is this and this and that. So you produce something else, like you invent a intelligence agency. It does something with yourself. You become an artist, the institution itself has a very different changes. It's the role theory plays in it, or philosophy plays in it, changes. So that is, I'm not saying this is, I'm not saying this to praise myself. I also have to go soon, but I'm just like trying to explain and make transparent or understandable my criteria. So on all these three levels, me, the object, and the world I live in, like, can I measure any differences? And if I would have organized a super interesting conversation with, what was the example, Hito Steil on surveillance, it might have been much more intelligent and much more insightful and everything, but like poetically it would have failed, institutionally it wouldn't have produced anything, It might have reached many more people, might have made me famous, might have made me rich, might have made me whatever. But the criteria for transformation are, the poetical criteria are different ones.